I think, please don't quote me on this, I think the earthquake you're referring to in 1999 was 7.2, and the one that occurred overnight was 7.8, as you can see on the bottom of your screen there, plus some very severe aftershocks. Now, there's a lot of factors that occur in earthquakes that are dependent on what damage is done. For example, how close it is to the surface. Well, this one was about 6 miles beneath the surface of the Earth, which is relatively shallow, but also exactly where they happen. And if they happen around major modern cities, then often the damage is less because the buildings and the infrastructure is more solid and better engineered. But if it happens in places like southwest Turkey, but certainly like northwest Syria, southeast Turkey, northwest Syria, many of the buildings just are not built to withstand. Certainly not an earthquake of this size, and so that is why I think the death toll in this will be extremely high. Now, whether or not it is close to what happened in 1999, we'll have to see, but it will certainly be more than it is currently at.
Alistair, just want to interrupt you if I may. We just heard from the World Health Organization with alarming news. They say they're concerned about areas in Turkey that they haven't heard from. Damage mapping is ongoing, but my goodness, they haven't heard from areas. One can only fear the worst when that is the case.
Yeah, I suppose you have to, if you're trying to keep a degree of optimism, things like telephone lines, mobile phone towers will have been downed as well. So maybe communication lines are just are simply not operating at the moment. But as we were saying earlier, we've been looking all morning at these shots here, and these will come from just a handful of cameras, live images provided by our Turkish counterparts. And so you've got to wonder where there aren't cameras, what the situation is like, because I think these cameras will normally be in the more urban areas. But the earthquake is indiscriminate and it will affect villages, towns, whatever the size. And I think across a very large swathe of that part of the Middle East, there will be images just like what we're seeing here. It's just that we haven't seen them yet for whatever reason. But it is going to be very hard to reach for everybody trying to get there. They have locked off the aviation corridors over the region in order to try and make sure they're not dealing with civilian aircraft. They don't want civilians to be landing there on the ground, even if people are trying to reach their loved ones. They will want to make sure that priority is given to aid flights and any military that might be trying to come in. And that is now going to be where the focus is. But I think the stories that are going to come out are going to be very hard to hear. And once people do start to reach those more outlying regions, I think they're going to find situations like this where there is no real emergency services, and it will probably be villagers and civilians who are doing the clear up and the rescue effort themselves.
Okay, Alistair, stand by if you would please. Turkey has issued a level 4 alert, which means that they need international help after the earthquake that hit the region along with Syria around about 4 o'clock this morning while people were still in their beds. The USA, Russia, Ukraine, France, Azerbaijan, Israel, India, Pakistan, Finland, Kosovo, Iceland have all offered support to those that need it most just at the moment. We are also hearing that the Turkish military have set up an air aid corridor. Some ports, some infrastructure, a lot of infrastructure has been devastated by what has happened. The death toll presently estimated at 600. Undoubtedly, that will continue to rise. Joining us now is Sir Peter Westmacott, and he is the former ambassador to Turkey. Hello to you, Sir Peter. Looking at these pictures, talk to us.
Good morning, Kate. Well, it's a terrible story. I would say it is a somewhat familiar one. Turkey is one of those countries which is prone to earthquakes. A lot of them take place in the Great Anatolian Fault Line towards the north. Just a few years ago, I was there in southwest Turkey when we had a 6.9 earthquake, which was a pretty scary thing to live through. This is obviously much more serious. It is as serious an earthquake as Turkey has had for 80 years. It is in the area in the southeast, and around Gaziantep isn't normally where they get earthquakes. But the one thing I would say is the Turkish Red Crescent, as well as the military, are extraordinarily good at dealing with this kind of crisis and emergency. So they will be moving as rapidly as they can. Of course, they'll need help with heavy lifting and humanitarian help. And it's cold down there, it's winter. So lots of assistance will be required. But, you know, my heart goes out to friends and people in Turkey, because this just happens so often through a fault of accidental geography, if you like.
Talk to me about this region. What's the infrastructure like down there?
Well, Gaziantep has become a very big hub for both business and humanitarian relief for refugees coming across the border from Syria, which is really not very far away. So some of the construction in and around Gaziantep is modern and therefore well built to resist earthquakes. But a good deal of it, as we're seeing in these very sad pictures, is, of course, old construction, not particularly high quality. The other thing that worries me a little bit, apart from the port of Mersin, which is nearby, is that the Turkish government has built a number of dams in that region in order to promote irrigation and store water. And you get a big earthquake on a dam, and you don't need me to explain the potential consequences. Fortunately, we've heard nothing about any water leakage, but your reporter was just saying there are bits of the region which have gone quiet. It may be because mobile cell towers are down. I found that when there was a big bomb in Istanbul when I was ambassador there, which killed a lot of my staff. You couldn't communicate with anybody because everyone's using cell phones and capacity is no longer there. So it may be that problem, but it might be something worse. It's too early to tell. So we have to fear and prepare for the worst.
And for viewers just tuning our way, they are all the time, of course, this particular area is home to an awful lot of displaced Syrians, isn't it?
Yes, around 3.5 million, conservative estimate, of Syrians come across the border because of the conflict in that country into Turkey. Some of them live in camps run by the Turkish Red Crescent, but some of them are free to roam and live and work in other parts of the country. But yes, there are a lot of people who've come across the border from Syria. And of course, we're not far away also from the border with northern Iraq, where 200,000 or 300,000 Kurdish people came across the border when they were being harassed by Saddam Hussein in the old days, and a number of them have settled down in the southeast. So you've got Syrians, you've got Kurds, you've got an Arab community, you've got Turks, of course, you've got all sorts, Armenians living in that part of Turkey. Gaziantep, though, a very important center for humanitarian relief because of Syria. So let's hope that they are at least reasonably well equipped to deal with this emergency, better than some of the other cities in that part of southeastern Turkey.
What are the medical facilities like in that region of the country, and what's the infrastructure?
It's pretty good because they've had to deal with such large numbers of people coming across the border from civil conflict situations to the south in both Syria and in Iraq. And they are used to dealing with large numbers who come with just the clothes on their back, and some of them injured, some of them unwell. Turkish public health generally, I would say, is of a high standard, very good at dealing with emergencies, nimble, quick, like the emergency responders. They move lifting gear and people and trucks and everything else into position very quickly. And on the whole, as I say, the hospitals are good, but what will the capacity be? How many people are going to need to be hospitalized, and will they have enough beds there? I don't know. I imagine it's quite likely that the Red Crescent and the military will be setting up field hospitals at pretty short notice to deal with the people who need emergency help.
Yeah, looking at the images though, as you were saying, it's freezing cold part of the world, especially at this time of year. We saw a lot of images of people earlier who were had come out of their buildings, thankfully, with their lives, but they were bewildered and the snow was falling around them.
And bear in mind the pictures we're seeing from Diyarbakir, that's kind of 100 miles or so to the northeast of Gaziantep. It's the epicenter could be even worse. We just don't know.
Okay, thank you very much indeed, Sir Peter. Thank you. Heartbreaking images from Diyarbakir this morning in Turkey. Latest death toll, 600 estimated. That number undoubtedly will rise still further. You can see, as I was talking about earlier, the human chain of people who've managed to find buckets from somewhere now to try and pick away at the rubble as gently as they can to try to make sure the buildings that have already collapsed don't collapse still further on those still trapped beneath them. This is what happened when the 90-second earthquake hit at 4 o'clock this morning. That could well actually have been, given that the light is there, and this initial earthquake happened before dawn. This is probably one of the aftershocks that we have been hearing about. Alistair has been monitoring events for us as well. He is in the Middle East. Alistair, this building I've watched a couple of times on social media today. It was standing after the initial quake, and then the tremors afterwards brought down this building. I'm sure that is happening. People milling around the bottom, not expecting this building to collapse, then running as quickly as they possibly could in the opposite direction when it started to fall. As I was saying, this, I'm sure, happening countless times around the region.
And just imagine being inside that building. You might have thought that you'd survive the initial earthquake, but that is pretty powerful proof of what aftershocks can do. And those aftershocks have already been very strong.